Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and it is my absolute pleasure to have all the way from Los Angeles, California, a man with a lot of experience and depth of experience in business, in sales, in peak performance, and also in negotiations, Mr. Derrick Chevalier. All the way from...
Very good. I love it.
Did I do okay?
Chevalier, that was very good. Yes, pretty
God.
damn close. I'll take it. That's good.
Man, Derrick, it's great. It's great to have you on the podcast. We were just talking just before we press record on some commonalities in terms of mentors and backgrounds in engineering and being in telecommunications.
Yeah.
You've been in industry for a long, long time, and without embarrassing you, your LinkedIn profile talks about you are the Van Gogh of negotiation.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you asked that. Why Van Gogh? That is connected to the fact that when I left the Karis organization and went out on my own, I had a 2-year non-compete, which I honored, I am pleased to say. But I gave up that contract because I was interested in really expanding my knowledge about negotiation and going way back and using my education background to do that. So ultimately, I created what became the SNUF, or Comprehensive Negotiating Universal Strategies program, and introducing that program to clients has been very, very difficult, especially in the beginning, right? Because prior to that, I had the Karis name behind me, and I'd go to clients and I'd say, hey, I'm not with them anymore. I got this great program. And they'd go, great, you're hired if you're doing Karis. You know?
Come on.
So the connect there is that I went to Amsterdam not long ago, actually, and spent a few days looking at his paintings. But it occurred to me what it must have been like to look at Starry Night, to have painted Starry Night, and then to have that sitting in a cafe somewhere with people not understanding or recognizing the value that was brought to the table, and the fact that it is now priceless and highly recognized. It's the same painting as are his others. So I reckon that to the idea of giving birth to snuff negotiating and saying how difficult it is to change the trajectory of people's long time thinking.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
And so since, is it right, since 2000, you've been the executive vice president of Harrison. I'm going to say this right. Chevalier.
That's perfect. I love it. That is correct. Yeah. And actually I was working because I never worked for the Karis organization. My company had a contract.
Right.
So that they would get the call, and then we would go out and actually tailor his program around that particular client. Yeah. But when I left, I just severed that. Still love the program. There's lots of great things about it. The Karis organization is the largest negotiating training program in the world. They do more seminars than anybody.
Yeah.
But my focus, therefore, since I didn't have that pedigree, was to do repeat and referral business.
Right.
So I went out and specifically targeted clients in specific areas. And then I sold them on the idea that, hey, one of the things that I'll do is if I'm doing business with you, I won't accept a contract from another competitor.
Yeah.
And what that did was get me access deep into that company's DNA, in which I could really look at how to develop and improve. So over about 10 years, I actually did proof of concept on many of the strategies and ideas that came from Snuff. And a lot of that is included in the book Evolve or Be Slaughtered, Negotiation for the 21st Century.
Nice. And that's coming out, is that coming out early 2025 or is it?
Exactly. And I just heard that today because I thought that we were going to be publishing it, that it was going to be published at the end of this year, but with a 2025 like an early publication.
Yeah.
But the publisher informed me today that we can't do that because of Amazon and a lot of other things. So it will be out, yeah, right in the first of 2025. Now the 2020 version of the book is actually online, but I would say there have been a lot of significant updates,
Yeah.
and the book was designed to be updated about every 5 years because
Okay.
the claim in that book is that snuff is the only universally applicable negotiating framework. So therefore, it needs to be able to be adaptable to any scenario or situation. And as things change
Yeah.
from 2020 to 2025, not a lot of the concepts changed, but what we did change were some of the examples that were updated. So it was a repeat of like these things happen, they're going to continue to happen, but here's an updated example of how it was. And then also things like AI and those
Yeah, of
sorts
course.
of things. Yeah,
Yeah, love it. Love it.
yeah,
So I'm gonna love delving into a little bit of stuff and how much
okay,
you're able to share, right? Because we
sure.
still want to recommend people to buy the book and so forth. But um I always like to delve into Derek people's backgrounds in terms of what you've done in your past, and you've got a really interesting background. You've been a morning show TV host. You've been at the Vietnam War and things like that. So
Right.
always really intrigued to understand. So what was the early, I guess, progression for you in terms of the experiences and what caused you to get into this sort of realm? So was it something that was preordained or predetermined, or was it something that you sort of moved into? Because you've been in sales, you've been in peak performance, you've been in real estate. So,
Yeah. And that's such a great, insightful question and a background. I appreciate that because I do have an eclectic background. And I recall that as a 10, 11 years old, I had a lot of interest, right? And my mother would often quote, don't be a jack of all trades, right? Like find something that you love and do that.
yeah.
That didn't resonate so much for me in the sense it's like, yeah, but over here and over there. And, I grew up in a little different era. So I would be gone, for a day and a half. My mom wondering
Where
where
is
I
he?
was. Yeah, what's over there? And there was no cell phone or anything like that, and I'd end up making my way home. So, uh, I really at about 14 decided one day I want to be a lawyer. That was my calling. Wanted to be a lawyer, and so all of my training, educationally, was for law school, politics, and also I double majored in theater, but almost exclusively to help me in the courtroom.
Okay.
So that theater background, and I also spent a lot of time in competitive speech in college. All of that was designed to enhance my legal career.
Hmm.
However, when I got to the end of my bachelor's and was ready to enter law school, I met a woman and my first wife, and ended up moving to a rural part of Washington and the law school was 100 miles away.
Yeah.
So, long story short, I ended up teaching. I got a master's degree and then taught at Western Washington University. But I also was pegged by a couple of professors to run an educational program that was housed within the Department of Education, but it was a college preparatory program that had kids from all over Washington, economic backgrounds, all of that. So I
Hmm.
taught university. And I loved that. I loved teaching. But I missed California, moved back, and I ended up in sales because that seemed like, gee, I've taught and selling is teaching, and I ended up selling consumer electronics.
Okay.
And that was really fantastic because I was working at La Brea and Sunset at the first international consumer electronics superstore. And it was right in front of A&M Records in Hollywood.
Okay.
So we had everyone of the old school you can name would come in there and we'd get to just interact with them because digital technology and all of that was brand new. So that was a great thing. And then I said, not my deal to do this forever. And I thought, well, do I want to go to law school? Now I ended up getting a broker's license and doing real estate. Not long. So a recession came up, and I thought, well, guess it's time to go to law school. And literally, I was looking in the newspaper, the classifieds, and I saw a little ad that said seminar leaders wanted.
Okay.
And that turned out to be the Caris organization that was interviewing hundreds of people for 3 spots that they had.
Wow.
And as soon as I went to, there was sort of a cattle call that they went to, but as soon as I did that, it was lights on for me because it brought together everything that I had done previously. The doing the seminars, the teaching, the law background, all of that came together. And then the negotiation part was fantastic because I got to be mentored by Dr. Karras and by the real architect, Frank Mobus. So that's how
Nice.
we got there.
Nice. And had you done the theatre element before that?
Yeah, I did theater almost all my life. I mean, in college, and then I would do community theater. But during the pandemic, for instance, talking about continuing education for sales, and I highly recommend this,
Mm.
I ended up doing stand-up comedy.
Oh, really?
So yes, I started looking at stand-up comedy online, which is impossible, right? To be funny online. But it's when the pandemic was over, I actually went to local comedy clubs, took classes, and I thought, you know what? I mean, if you can get up in front of a microphone in 5 minutes, command attention, be direct, and make people laugh, that's got to be something that would be valuable in sales. It's the hardest thing a person will ever do. But I highly recommend it. I don't think people realize how much science and physiology and psychology is involved in crafting a joke. And just a short anecdote. Right after that during that period, I got to go to the comedy club, and you would see seasoned, very, very famous people come in, get up on stage, and they were all rusty. And
Yeah.
so I got to watch people start with a bit never done before, and then over the period of a year or so, perfect that. And today, some of these folks are doing comedy shows, sold out shows and LinkedIn, I mean, in specials and everything else. Pretty phenomenal. Yeah,
Yeah.
to watch somebody. And that's exactly what we do in the sales realm, right? It's really an orchestration and
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a play that's
It is.
involved with that.
It is.
So yeah, that's a pretty eclectic background, I would say.
So the other thing back in was it January 2017, you were on the morning show, and you did that for 7 years. What got you on? How did that come about?
So in another interesting story, I was actually invited to be a guest on this morning show when Evolve in the first edition of Evolve, which is in 2015. They said, would you like to be a guest? So I went on the show. And about 4 or 5 months later, I got another call and they'd say, hey, we'd like to have you back on the show. So I went back on the show. And about 3 months later, they go, we'd like you to host this show. So, or be a co host on this show. And I'm like, Yeah, I like
Okay.
that. And again, that was a different experience to be on set, talk to all kinds of guests from all kinds of different political and social. And we got to eat a lot too. We'd always have chefs in there. So,
Nice.
debate with people. And so all of that contributed to what I do. And I'll say one other thing that one of the things I took away from Karis was that in teaching negotiation and teaching a framework, that's one set of skills.
Mm.
But what I really found my bailiwick was in the consulting part. So all the study and all the different things that I had in this background allowed me to be able to listen to someone's situation, ask a series of questions, and then be able very quickly to provide step by step action steps that they could implement.
Mm.
And that became what we call now stealth consulting. So
Okay.
very often I'm talking with a client, or there may be a team of clients in China or wherever they are, and they'll have a cell phone in the middle of the thing. Jim couldn't make it today. And I will be sitting in on that meeting. And during the entire time, I will be texting, sit here, stop, go,
Yep.
whatever it is, or debriefing. And sometimes I'll go and actually sit in with a client and go as a member of their team and then help understand and navigate from there. So all of those experiences have contributed something to what ultimately got me where we are tonight.
Nice. Nice. And so, what you guys do today, you've got a team of negotiation consultants and trainers. So, you work with all sorts of different organizations, helping them become more efficient, more effective in negotiations. So, what I'd like to jump into, because there's probably people listening to this who are sales leaders who are thinking, oh, I've just come out of a negotiation and we're trying to do this win-win stuff, but it's very much win-lose. And oh
Right.
my God, the customer's got me over a barrel. How do I learn how to be better, effective, more communicative, more efficient negotiator? In reading a bit of your bio, you've got some interesting takes on concepts like win-win and BATNA and stuff like that, which a lot of
Right.
people would be conscious of. Let's just delve into some key principles that you live by from a negotiation point of view. And if it's okay, talk a little bit
Sure.
about snuff and what that's about and how it could be applicable for people that are listening
Sure,
to
for
this.
people right now.
Yeah,
So
so
let's
if
look at that. Go ahead.
I was just going to
Uh,
ask you just the first question, because a lot of people, and I've spoken to a few people who are experts in negotiation, and
sure.
they have different interpretations around what this win-win thing is, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes people think win-win is, well, we both have to win, so there's an equalization there. Um,
Right.
what's your perspective on that? Because you've got an interesting, or you're challenging the notion of win-win from a
Sure.
negotiating point of view.
Thanks so much. So, from my perspective, win-win is a misnomer.
Hmm.
And here's why. So in many of the seminars that I've done over the years, we'll do practice negotiations. Many companies will do things like this.
Yeah.
So someone will do a practice negotiation and they've got a background and a story, but ultimately it's going to be a transactional situation. Some I need to go buy something, you're selling something, there's some backstory you don't know, backstory I don't know. We come together, I set a top saying I need to get X, and the least I'll take is Y. The other counterpart has done the same thing. We engage in a negotiation. Number one, if we then come to an outcome that was within those parameters, people walk away saying that was win-win. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got some or most of what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so we walk away saying, well, that's win-win. Well, after years of doing that, it occurred to me one day, well, how's it actually win-win? Because I actually knew all of the cases, all of the details, all of the options that were available, which not everybody else had. So
Yeah.
therefore, think of it this way. Take what's your favorite sport?
My sport, it's AFL football.
All right. So let's take football. So in a football game, same is true in tennis, soccer, anywhere else. Let me ask you a question. How do we know who the what the score is?
Oh, we look at the scoreboard.
We look at the scoreboard. Now, who gets to see the scoreboard?
Well, the players, but also the fans, everybody
There's
that's at the game.
everybody,
Yeah.
everybody. And therein lies the rub. Or in the South, they say, there's your trouble.
Hmm.
Because who gets to look at the scorecard in a negotiation?
Well, it's normally the people negotiating.
Yes, but who gets to look at in the game? There's each team score. There's
Hmm.
no hidden scorecard.
No.
There's no points behind the scene. But in a real negotiation, that's not true at all. There's a ton of information that you never had access to. There was a ton of options you never saw. There were phone calls that took place that you never heard. You have
Yeah.
no idea who you were actually even negotiating with. If it was the people in the table or somebody that told them to be there, right?
Yeah.
Are they running a script or
Yeah.
are they going off script? So in that sense, the misnomer of win-win is I assume or presume that I won because the outcome was within a certain set of parameters. Well,
Yeah.
that's a presumption. It's not
Yeah.
a fact, right?
Yeah.
It's there is from a really from a perspective, solid perspective, all you know is that you got an outcome within the parameters that you thought you could accept. Now, ultimately, if you look at it from a quantitative standpoint, that actually means who are you actually negotiating against?
Mm.
Who?
Well, who? Who
Yeah.
you? Well, we're almost negotiating against the competition or the other party.
Wait a second. In order to do that, you've had to have seen, don't forget, in the game, we see we don't know the place, but
Yeah.
we see the score,
Yeah.
right? We don't get access to all of the different options and audibles that take place, but we see the score. And the score is what goes in the record books. So
Mm.
if you take that to an actual negotiation, you never see the backdrop. You never actually know what the other position, what was possible, because you weren't looking for it. You're actually negotiating against yourself,
Self,
not
yeah.
against the other person.
And is that because we have maybe a preordained view or perspective, or we've framed our own frame of reference, for want of a better term, based on the information that we think we have or the beliefs we
Yeah,
have?
well, it has to do with the experience and the training that we have. So
Yeah.
we've done a lot of research over the last year asking professionals all around the world whether or not they thought that formal negotiating training was important. Vast majority of people said no, it helps, but I have 10 years of experience.
Yeah.
Well, I frequently demonstrate to my clients that your experience it really is your biggest limitation. Because if you've never had any training, all you've done is trial and error. And therefore, you can't, when a football team gets done, they go back and look at the films. They
Yeah.
go back and analyze every element, a tennis player, anybody else. But if you're going on experience, nobody ever told you what mistakes you made. You don't
Mm.
have the capacity to actually analyze where that might have been different.
Yeah.
So, experience is a great teacher, but as the saying goes, a fool will learn in no other. Now, on the other hand, if you have training and your training is from any one of the larger like a Karis or a Harvard. And the truth is that most negotiating programs outside of those are very heavily borrowed from Karis. Karis was decades before anybody else, and then Harvard will look at that. So if you're following a rule, take this rule: don't split the difference. Now, many people that know that rule and
Yeah.
practice it.
Yeah.
One of the most best-selling books right now is Chris Voss's book, which is Never Split the Difference. So
I think I've got it
Let's
here somewhere.
Sure. So let's take a look at what you're learning if you're following those paths. So we know that the never split the difference was borrowed, if you will, from Karras because his third rule is don't split the difference. So I'm sure they spent all of 20 minutes coming up with that variation, never split the difference. I mean, long, hard work. But let's look. I wrote an article that's available on LinkedIn where I said, never split the difference, don't split the difference, two bad ideas. Now, why are they bad ideas? In part because of the example I just gave you. But the bigger picture is that if you've been trained, don't split the difference or never split the difference, you've actually been trained to fail a number of times on those occasions when the only outcome available beyond deadlock was to split the difference.
Yeah.
So if you come into a set of circumstances when, like, even though you don't know it, the reality of it is, if we looked at it from an omni position, is there's nothing that you could say or do or anything else because the other person's drilled in. They don't necessarily have any bad in for not losing the deal. And so the deal that they will accept is to split the difference.
Mm.
So if I've been trained, don't split the difference, I've left a lot of money on the table and never even realized it. Why? Because I was following a rule that limited my ability to determine when. So what we would train you to do as snuff negotiators is to provide the skills and the knowledge you need to determine when splitting the difference is your
Makes
only
sense.
option,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Yeah, and on Chris Voss's book, one of the things I share, and I think Chris does a lot of great job, and there's a lot of good things to do it. But I do ask lots of people this question, and I'll ask you this question.
Yeah.
So in your sales career and your journey, how many people in your work with clients today, how many times have you been in a negotiation where the counterpart you were negotiating with or selling to was dead or in jail at the end of the negotiation? How many times has that happened in your
He's
career?
dead or in jail.
Yeah, they're dead or in jail. Yeah.
Is that a
Has
is
it-
that a is that
no,
a
I'm asking
metaphor?
you seriously. Has that ever been the case in your career?
Well, there's no person who has actually been dead or in jail after the end of my negotiations.
Exactly. And that's probably true for your listeners. So I asked you this question. Then how does a person whose entire professional career was only involved in negotiations where the person was dead or in jail qualify to teach you to negotiate in a corporate environment? I'm just asking. I'm just asking. Now, what I look at that, and I certainly make that honest assessment about that, it's a good question. If I told you that I'd been in situation where somebody's dead or alive, and they said, now let me teach you how to do that, and you're never in that situation, you might actually question, well,
Mm.
what out of your experience really is germane for me beyond the fact that I have a best-selling book?
Yeah.
Now, I would answer that question by saying, well, now I made that observation when I read the book, I did the analysis, and then I'd say, well, where is the book? Where can it be really valuable? And then we go back again, taking a quantitative perspective, and we say, well, what are the parameters that gave birth to the book?
Mm.
So, in Chris's experience, there were some specific issues that are true in the situations he was in. Number one, he was in a specific location where the perpetrator is and where the hostage is.
Yeah.
So, he knows where they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Second of all, there is a dire time limit. We got to get people out of there as soon as we can because it's a life or death, and we don't know what the medical or any of
Yeah.
things like that. So that's true. That the stakes are very high because if he makes a mistake, someone may die. They may threaten or actually take someone's life in
Yeah.
order to get what they want. So what that tells me is when I'm in a situation where the stakes are critical, life and death, where I've got either everything to gain and everything to lose, where I know who all of the players are, In those situations, that's the book I would go to.
Yeah.
Because in those situations, that's the expertise that and a lot of the things that he talks about that you would want that would be germane at that time. But
Yeah.
if you're going to take that same insight and put it in a situation that doesn't have those parameters, just from a, again, quantitative standpoint, there's a lot of times when you're going to completely miss the boat because you were fishing with the wrong bait.
And then you think about the impact that that then has on that relationship with that organization moving forward. That
Yes.
you've said we're not going to split the difference, therefore we're prepared to walk away.
Yeah.
And you both have probably left a lot of stuff on the table where if you had have come together and really worked it through, because the other question I was going to ask you with all of this is how much work do we need to do in the beginning to have clearly identified the intention of both parties?
Right.
Is there an intention for us to do something together? So is
Right.
there that common foundation? And when I look at win-win,
Right.
I look at that to say first, the first win-win is there potential for us to do business? That's a
Right.
win-win. Then we
Right.
move on to the next phase.
Yes, I agree with that. Is there a potential? Now, the issue for me would be how am I solidifying that? Because if I say, is there a environment for us to seek a win-win outcome?
Mm,
And if I look at that question and somebody said yes, well, now my question is, well, what can we do to put skin in the game around that approach?
yeah.
Because if I'm just going to take your word for it and I don't know you, then of
Yes.
course my limitation is whatever your ethical and moral standards are. And
Mm,
if all I'm saying is, wow, you're a really nice guy and I like you. We also did a poll with several 100,000 people asking that whether or not you could determine if an outcome was win-win based on the personality of the other person. And almost a vast majority of people said, yeah, if a person is nice, if they're smiling, if they're open, yeah, I'm more likely to think that there's a win-win. Well, I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer, it worked great for him, you know.
mm. Well,
You
and
didn't walk up to people and go, hey, like your lunch. And then,
your
when we leave,
lunch.
you know what I'm saying? I'm sure that I mean, I'm taking it, being a little funny with the thing, but what I'm saying is if a person is really strategic, they know very well that to present themselves in a way that is pleasing and acceptable to the other party. Well, that has nothing to do with their extension, with their intention.
Mm,
So as we're moving forward, there's going to be a demonstrated actions that back up whether or not we're moving to win-win. And
that's
so
it.
part of that, let's also, you ask about a BATNA because it
Yeah.
comes in here too. So the BATNA is from the Harvard program, and their program, the Harvard program on negotiation, grew out of the book Getting to Yes. And almost everyone, even those who haven't read the book, are aware of best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Yeah.
So on page 101 of that book, Dr. Uri says everyone should have a BATNA in every negotiation. So again, I would remind you, who is in the room when you come up with that BATNA? You are your team.
Yes.
The other team has their own BATNA and you're not there.
That's
So
it.
when you walk in that room knowing if I can't get what I'm looking for, this is my fail safe. Well, you've guaranteed the fact that the fail safe is more likely to occur because your focus was on that anchor that you set from your perspective has nothing to do with what's actually possible in that negotiation. So
So with that, are we saying that best practice is to not necessarily focus our attention on a BATNA, but be open to identifying, challenging, qualifying the intention of the other party as to whether we want to actually come up with some form of an agreement?
That is exactly right. So and of course, snuff is actually how you do that. But here's the question that right there to say yes and back up what you're saying. The idea is if we know these things are true, that we're not seeing both, and if we know that we have a batina and they have a batina, what I suggest to my clients is this. If we know that's true, shouldn't that shift our intention, to quote you, when we enter the negotiation? So
Yeah.
suddenly it's not to get a win-win outcome based upon that BATNA or something that we said.
Mm.
It is focused on finding out how much we can learn about the other side and their intentions that we didn't know when we walked in the room.
Yeah.
So for me, the outcome of a negotiation is best measured, number one, after it takes place,
Yeah.
not during. And secondly, it should be analyzed on the basis of how much of the outcome was based on information, on data, and on relationship that we did not have when we walked in that room.
Mm.
Because I'll guarantee you, if the outcome falls somewhere within the parameters we set before we got there, it's a guarantee that we left the best deal on the table. We never even got, it's like peeling the outside of the apple and never eating the actual apple. The peels are good. I'm all for that. You can use them for cookies. But if we're going to have apple pie, you're going
We
to have
need
to
the
slice
apples.
the apple. You're right. We need
Absolutely.
apple. Right.
So with that, and we talk about win-win and the intention. What's your thought on? Because some people look at negotiations as a competition.
Right.
So what's your take on if you're advising organizations? We'll talk about snuff in a second, but
Sure.
what's your thought on the competitive nature of negotiation? Should we be going in saying this is a competition? We need to make sure we get the best outcome we possibly can, or
Right.
is it competitive collaboration?
Right. So that those are both definable terms. And here's where the rubber meets the road. In snuff, we are highly, highly focused on making sure that you and I have the same definitions of those terms when we go in. So
Okay.
that's the first place to start, because if
Yeah.
we're defining those terms differently, then we're going to miss each other thinking that we're even speaking the same language. So one of the things that we point out is this. The word the in my book Influence Rapport Results, I talk about and ask the question, what is the fundamental purpose of competition? Fundamentally, that is no fundamentally at its deepest darkest core, what is the purpose of competition? Now, when we asked that question globally, we got all kinds of answers, as we expected we
Yeah.
would. Then when we went back and we said, well, actually, the fundamental purpose of competition is to obliterate the other side.
Right.
People lost their minds, right? That may actually be in my bio or one
It
shot.
is.
And I've had people call, we can't talk to you because the way you look at that, and they don't ask the question that you did, like, what are we talking about? So here's the point. Fundamentally, I would ask any person to give me an example where a Rockefeller or where any Titan, today that would be Elon Musk, name any Titan who does not want 100% of control of the business they're in.
There you go.
And we will have a long silence.
Yeah.
From the dawn of man, from the dawn of man, competition has always been that one party dominating the other, just shy of extinction, and then they put the people that are left over, indoctrinate them, and use them to build their society. That's true worldwide, and there are no exceptions to it.
Mm.
Where
Mm.
there have been exceptions, those civilizations don't exist,
Mm.
right? So historically, we've had conquerors and caretakers. Conquerors believe that they are the origin of life and that everything revolves around them, and caretakers believed that they are the caretakers working in communication with the world or environment that they were in.
Mm.
Well, that's great, except that when the conquerors show up, there's no competition for them. They just took over, right? And then they shaped the world and every culture in it. So if we say at its root, competition is to dominate the other side.
Mm.
Now, the question would be, is that what we want to do? Well, no, it's not. No, probably not.
Yeah.
So the others, what we've done is we look at negotiation on a continuum
Yeah.
rather than looking at it in a vertical way of win, lose, or lose, lose. We now look at it on a continuum, which says there are ranges of competition and competitiveness and ranges of, and along that continuum, there will be cooperation and degrees of cooperation. And how do we tell where we are? By looking at what we call the equality of transparency. So if the transparency that I provide to you
Yeah.
is equal to the transparency that you provide to me, that means our risks are relatively the same. Our reward is relatively the same, though they may be look differently. Um, that's what defines the outcome of a negotiation. And this is when people understand that, it's like, how come somebody didn't come up with it before? Well, I'm kind of glad they didn't because
Because
I've
you did.
just it's waiting for me. But ultimately, when you think of it, you'd say, well, yeah, there's times when it was win-win, but I think I might have been done better, or else somebody will say, I know had I waited one more second, how many times have people found that had they waited or had they asked another question or for another piece of data, they would have at the very least, the other person would say, no, I'm not going to give you that. Well, it's at that point that we then start to negotiate what that outcome's going to look like.
Mm.
But at the point that I come with you and you say, you know what, Derrick, I can't share with you that's proprietary information. Well, what you've told me then is the only deal that we have access to is the deal that's on the table based upon the data we have.
Yeah.
Now, we may come up with a deal and we may walk away saying that's win-win, but snuff negotiators understand that we're just saying it because you understand what we mean. We know very well that we didn't get the data, and had we had access to that data, the deal that we got might have not looked good at all. So
So
it's a different way of thinking.
so how do you then I guess cross that threshold
Right.
to increase the equality of the transparency? Because there will be, and I've seen it happen and I've done it myself. There's
Sure.
stuff that we just don't want to share for various different reasons. And we think, well, that's our competitive advantage.
Right.
That's our key pillar of the final
Right.
negotiation. And if we give that up, then
Right.
we lose our positional power.
Right. And so what you just described, is that a cooperative position or competitive? The moment you say, here is proprietary information that we are not going to share, you just defined the negotiation. And
That's
that's
it.
not cooperation. That is a form of competitive negotiation based upon the significance of what you're withholding.
Yeah.
Because if what you're withholding, and you know what that is, would fundamentally change the construct of the deal. But why don't people share it? Well, because the other side has proprietary information too. That's
Yeah.
why I say more often than not, the best deal was laid on the table.
Mm.
So the objective really becomes to deal with the underlying reason why you won't share that proprietary information.
Yeah.
And that's going to come down to risk, fear, called company policy, and we don't know how to get there. so, so so if we're dealing with negotiating tactics during that period, we're missing the boat. because the real question is, which is it? Is it that you risk, what you fear, that if you share XYZ with me, that I will not share XYZ with you, and then you lose it? Because once I find out what you're not telling me, you're exactly right. Will I take that and then come back at you,
Mm.
having incorporated what you shared with me? Well,
Yeah.
that's why it makes no sense to walk around going, yep, we had a win-win outcome. So,
Man.
I'll share one thing like this. Here's the thing. Feelings are not facts. So, so therefore, when we ask, again, another poll, thousands and thousands of people, how do you know you were in a win-win negotiation? He said, well, because I feel like it was a great process. And so what does that tell me? That tells me that an astute snuff negotiator should be negotiating your feelings to get you to expose more facts without doing the same. And that will dictate how cooperative or competitive we are. So there's a process and a science to that based upon the individual ethics and morals and outcomes, desires of the parties.
Wow. And therefore, the definition of win-win could be different from both parties. The person who feels they've got a good deal is the win-win. The person who used the emotions to deliver the facts to get a better deal for themselves and thinking, how good's this? The power ratio now is completely up.
Absolutely. And so that's why so if a snuff negotiator or a trained negotiator is dealing with someone who does not have skill, they'll prevail almost every time. And the reason is exactly what you said. My objective is to send you away feeling great. I
Yeah.
want you happy because I want to do business with you again.
Yeah.
So if I control how you feel, and without exposing data, and I get more data from you, that you feel great, like you were just in a win-win, which we're calling a cooperative outcome, but in fact you just got spanked. Or I sometimes say, the reason people feel like they so good after a win-win is probably because somebody got screwed. I mean, that's
Which is why the review of the negotiation after the fact is really important. I'm
exactly.
conscious of time because it's quite late where you are, but
Yeah.
I'd love you to share with us some key, I guess, some key principles around snuff that can help maybe people listening to this enhance their skill set, their knowledge around negotiations to improve their definition of win-win.
Right. Right. So I would say certainly pay some attention and go back and listen to the podcast. Take a listen and then isolate those definitions and really think about them. Because if you think about it's kind of revolutionary to think that, wait a second, I know that I did not get a win-win because I know that there was a lot of information they didn't give me. Now the question is, well, what do I need to do to change that going forward? You mentioned one, it's preparation,
Yeah.
right? Number two, one of the axioms that I share with people is this: negotiate people, not problems. Nego- you're It's not the problem that's going to make a decision about what they give you or don't give you or how the negotiation moves forward. It's the person.
Yeah.
So think about the personality of that person and also think about human needs that person needs to fulfill, right? Because everybody basically has the same set of needs, but we're at different spots. Sometimes a person it responds to significance.
Yeah.
So that if I said to you, and in the political realm, there's a great example of that. If I say to you, not you, but I'm speaking editorially, but if I say to what we call an omnipotent commander, you're fantastic. You're so bright, and everything you say and do is correct.
Yeah.
And their response is, how did you know? Then I've understood that what I need to do is to feed your need for significance in order to set you up for whatever tactic or technique that's going to follow. And you'll
Get what
feel
I
great.
want.
Yeah. So part of it is to identify your own communication style and that of your others. And I think in the book and all online, influence, rapport, results, which
Yeah.
is actually evolve and influence go together. But that book talks about the five communication styles. It talks a little bit more about competition. But I think the biggest one is this: negotiate people, not problems. So who are the people that are running the plays? The coach is over there designing the play, but they're not the person that's getting smashed up out on the field, right? So
Yeah.
you got a X's and O's on a paper, but I've got a 300 pound. I played center in football. And I've got a 300-pound person that doesn't understand that you just told me to do something they don't want me to do. So on that particular day, I have to figure out, does this person start with their right foot or their left foot? Is their right hand dominant or their left hand dominant? Do they
Yeah.
move back before they move forward, or do they have any kind of a tell
Mm.
that would give me an indication? Because once I identify that, I've identified their weakness, and
Yeah.
that's where I'm going to hit. After
Mm.
the game, I might share that with them, probably not during.
Well, because you're going to play them again at some stage.
Exactly. And you give it away. So, I'd love to talk to you again, and we'll talk about how these things work in terms of long-term relationship versus a transaction, because that's very different. If I'm negotiating with you and I'm never going to see you again, it's
Yeah.
probably a different bird than if I'm dealing with you on an ongoing basis. So,
Yeah. So,
really appreciate it.
no, thank you. And at a question I'm being dying to ask you, and I'll ask it now in terms of because you mentioned values, obviously personality, human needs, and things like that, and knowing what makes the other party tick.
Yes.
And maybe some closing comments around this. Your thoughts on ethical business practice insofar as negotiating.
Right. So we're going to deal with axioms. And again, Snuff is dealing with universal principles. So I'm looking for principles that don't have an exception. So the principle there is that perception trumps reality. The individual's ethical and moral standards are before you sat down with them are that person's ethical and moral standards, and they're not yours.
Yeah.
So, in terms of what you do with that, first is to understand that just because they're nice may not line up with the ethical principles or moral principles insofar as business is concerned.
Mm.
So, what we would want to do is to align those and be aware of the fact that I have an ethical and a moral set of guidelines, and so does that person. So, interacting with people and asking them poignant questions that might give you an insight about, hey, I've got a situation with my son and my daughter, and I don't know what to do about it. Do you have kids? And you would say, "Yeah, I have kids." I don't. So your kids, how old are they? 10 or 12. That's about what my kids are. What would you do in a situation like? And that person will give you a compass to who
Yeah.
they are. If they're stumbling and trying to make it up in
Mm.
order to satisfy you, that should tell you something.
Yeah.
If they have a clear set of guidelines that they could share, the objective is not necessary to change those, but to design your strategy with that take into considerations what roadblocks and opportunities those ethical and moral limitations or guideposts bring.
Brilliant. Brilliant. It's and in order to do that, we as negotiators have to have a very highly attuned emotional intelligence faculty to be able to see that
Absolutely.
and read the play.
Absolutely. And that's what we're doing. Your focus is on sales. What are we actually doing? in that situation, either we're just selling someone, meaning we know what our objective is. Our objective is to sell the product or service that we're selling. The question is, what are we willing to do to get that done?
Mm.
And because ultimately the entire purpose of selling is to sell. And
Yeah.
if we don't do that, we don't get paid. So that ultimately is that moral and ethical compass is built into us about, are we actually looking to an outcome? I just a quick anecdote. I had somebody call me who is one of the former original Shark Tank members, and we'd gotten a conversation about maybe doing a partnership. And so one of his representatives that I was talking to said, you know what? This is so great. You're so great. Looks great. And we're going to have a program in Las Vegas. And, he and his sons would love to meet you and talk about this potential partnership. And I said, great. And he said, yeah. And so it's only $4,500. So I said, let me think about that. And then I waited and I wrote him a text and I said, you know what? You're doing a program and that's your focus. And that's not really the form for me. But I'll tell you what, Las Vegas is an hour flight from me.
Yeah.
You're in Florida. So I'll tell you what, why don't I just fly down to Florida, take you to lunch, and let's talk about the partnership? Because I have skin in the game. I'm willing to do that.
Yeah.
So when can we set up that lunch? You know what I heard back?
Crickets.
So I followed up. So the enthusiasm and incitement to meet me and to work on the partnership was ultimately to sell me a seat in you. And to this day, I don't know. He may hear this podcast and understand. And this is somebody that's world famous, billionaire, all of
Yeah.
that. And so a very nice, has a great personality. You would think his sons are the CEO and whatnot of his company. So you would think, but ultimately, what was the actual objective? That had nothing to do. And even despite the fact, knowing what I do, that I might just like, what am I supposed to be complimented because I only have to pay you $4,500 and I get to meet you? Oh, I mean, wow, I'm so excited. But which is why I said I can get a flight to Las Vegas for $50. It'll cost me 2 days
Yeah.
and $1,000 to go, and I'll pay for the lunch if we're going to have a
That's
conversation.
it.
That was to let you know that ultimately I understand exactly what your ethics and your morals are. And I just told it on a podcast. Lucky for them,
Well,
I'm not
and
going to
that
share
is
the.
a great way to end it, because you find out so much about people's intentions through the actions and sometimes the language, but often the actions they take after the language. It's
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was thinking what you're going to say is, oh, it's only $4,500. Oh, you don't understand. I don't get out of bed for at least 9,500. So I'm not going to charge you 4,500 to meet me. You need to pay me 9,500.
That would have been a good one too. That's a great one. We call that reverse escalation. That would have been a great one. What? No, I don't. Yeah. But ultimately, and to this day, I'm sure that he has no idea
No,
that that was actually a tactic to find out what the ultimate intention was.
that
So
is just,
having that insight and that intention, along with the kinds of skills that you're teaching your clients and interacting with, that's what they need us for.
yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I will just share this in the end. One of the things that we do offer is a no obligation, no cost consultation on an issue that somebody might have. We do on demand consulting because that's what I love. So
Yeah,
somebody can call up, we'll talk to them a little bit. If we've got a quick answer, we'll share that, point them in the right direction. If it's a good fit to do a little bit more than that, then we'll go there. But ultimately, we don't hold anything back. We want to have an opportunity to encourage people, because when that works,
yeah.
that becomes a good marketing for us to have somebody say,
Oh,
yeah, you got some insight.
100%, 100%. So, Derek, with that in mind, where's the best place for people to connect with you, learn a little bit more about what you do?
I
and
think
also
so
take
much.
advantage of something like that?
Sure. I would really encourage people to get a quick snippet on my background on LinkedIn. You can just go to LinkedIn, look up Derrick Chevalier. There is also a link there over to our company page, h-c.com. And there's a lot more information there. Books are all over the place on the internet. But yeah, have folks come over to LinkedIn. There's a click there. Happy to speak with people. And I can't sell you anything until I talk to you and I know that we've got a match. Because honestly, at this point in my career, uh, I really want to encourage, and my mission is to have these kinds of conversations to encourage people about widening their perspective and then crafting deals that make sense for them
Yeah,
using the other kinds of sales techniques and communication techniques that work best for them. But you first need to understand that foundation. And that's what we're looking to do with Evolve and IR Influence Rapport Results.
love it, love it. So Derek, hey, I greatly appreciate, well, first of all, the flexibility, because we were going to do this earlier this week. So thank you
Yeah,
for your flexibility. And I know it's later in California right now, so I do appreciate you taking the time. Been a
my
fabulous
privilege.
conversation. Thank you so
Thanks
much
so
for being
much.
on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast.
My thanks for you. Really appreciate the invitation. And I want to come back when the book comes out. We'll
We'll
talk
definitely
about the
do.
Evolve book. All right.
Absolutely. Good on you, mate.
Thanks so much. You take
Thank you.
care.
You too.
All right. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.